USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, January 28th, 2019. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Before we start, a reminder that this episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Well, Jim, another weekend where top teams go down, including a sweep in the mix. But why don't we start out with a series that seems to have generated a little bit of controversy, and that was number one St. Cloud for a pair of games at North Dakota, a split. And the controversy really happened in Friday night's game.
Yeah, and most people, if you've been on social media or you've been trying to follow this from afar, or, especially if you're a North Dakota fan, there was what appeared to be a knee-on-knee hit in that game, and the result was a pretty, a season-ending injury for the North Dakota player. There was no penalty called on the play against Schultz, the St. Cloud player. There was a retaliation player penalty for a slash right afterwards called on North Dakota. There was no video review of the hit during the game, and we can get into why that might have been. And there was no supplemental discipline handed out. And to fans, I get it. You've just seen a player go down. You've just seen a player injured, and you've just lost that player for the season. And even Bradbury, the coach, you can see his frustration on Friday night. So you would think that there would be something just automatically. I mean, we know kneeing is a penalty. We know kneeing often turns into a 5-minute major. But when I've watched the play, and we just watched it together remotely here, but when I watch the play, there's a few things that stand out to me. People say, how did you miss the penalty originally? Well, there's a couple of referees in good position. One is at a 90-degree perpendicular angle to the play. And from that angle, and this is the closest referee, he likely saw it as a hip check because you can't tell exactly what part of the body's going out. It was an area of the ice where it was a natural hip check area. So you just, okay, that was a pretty good hip check. You then have the other referee who was along the same boards looking down ice 2 zones away at the play. He had another player to look through, and he had a linesman to look through. Easily could have missed the penalty. And that seems to be what happened. The referees didn't see the original penalty. Now people say, well, why didn't they go in and review it on video? The reality is you can't. You can review for major penalties, but you need to at least have a minor penalty called to go and review and see whether that was worthy of a major or worthy of a major plus a game misconduct or a game disqualification. So in essence, the referees were a little bit hamstrung to the inability to review it. Even if they did, I'm not sure. I mean, when you look at the league the next day saying that we didn't add supplemental discipline, it's likely, I'm not thinking for Josh Fenton or anybody else in that league. You see that there was no intent to injure a player. What the St. Cloud player Schultz did was make a knee-jerk reaction when he realized he couldn't get his hip out and stuck his leg out. You end up getting a knee-on-knee hit. Listen, 90% of the time, that type of hit is usually a trip. You don't end up, locking knees with another player. These guys did lock knees, and the end result, unfortunately, is a really bad injury and mishmash for North Dakota out for the season. So I get it. You can be really frustrated with it, but letter of the law and the rule book and the way things happen, referees are going to miss calls. They do it all the time. It's human error. We see New Orleans Saints fans filing lawsuits against the NFL because of a missed call, in the NFC Championship game. It's a human nature thing that you're not going to be perfect. And I think the missed call is what kind of sets off a chain reaction of frustration for North Dakota fans.
Well, one thing that might be an option on that, and then, and let me preface this by saying I don't want to add more video to the game, although I think by and large video is being used fairly well. But in cases where there's a player injury, that maybe the rule should be amended to say, okay, if somebody's injured, we need to go back and look at it for two reasons. One, to make sure we didn't miss something. And second, to try to cut down on actions that will cause injury. I saw two players possibly lost for a long time or for the season on plays where video clearly shows that a penalty was committed, but no arm went up, so nothing could be called. And in fact, one of them I would suspect, were there not more egregious things that had gone on over the weekend, might even have gotten some video review. So I can understand from a fan standpoint. For coaches, I know Brad Berry was frustrated. You lose a player who has just come back a couple of weeks ago from injury, and you're like, what's going on here? And those kind of violent type injuries. And again, not to characterize Jimmy Schultz on that, but it was a hard hit. Those kind of injuries are things that the NCAA doesn't want to see. Nobody wants to see people get hurt that badly. So, something needs to be done to be able to do that. One thing I was thinking about this morning before we hopped on is also the question about whether the game at the speed it's being played now, whether there's difficulty for officials to be able to keep up with it. I had an opportunity to talk with a colleague who follows closely with the American Hockey League over the weekend and asked him about how things were going in that area in the AHL. And he said one of the things they're doing there is they're really trying to recruit young former players who played at a high level, whether it's AHL players, Division III players, whatever, club players who played hockey at a pretty good level, who have a feel for the game and are in good shape and are able to get up and down the ice. It looked like from the video we watched that both referees were in proper position. But you have to ask that question too. So there are a lot of things that need to be looked at, but we've talked an awful lot over the course of this season about how the game has evolved, how the speed is picked up, how you have different players getting involved in different ways. So there's a lot more to watch, and it's happening at a faster pace.
Yeah, and there's a lot in what you just said to address. I'll start out with the former players, and I've talked to a number of coaches who believe, and some coaches have said, listen, shame on us that we're not, pushing guys that aren't going to have professional, long professional careers into officiating, because most coaches out there believe that it's the former players that actually make the best officials because they have that feel for the game. We've talked about that on this show before. In terms of, when there's an injury to a player, being able to review when there was no penalty coming up, I think the way that almost has to be addressed is something that they've added in many different forms into the rule book at the NHL level and even now at the college level. And it would be through a coach's challenge type of situation where the coach can say, listen, you guys have to go review this play, but I'm going to put my timeout on the line. Because I think that if we literally are giving officials the opportunity to watch a game a second time, every time there's a question in their mind, boy, we got to go in and review something, we're just slowing down the game. And this game, between leagues taking too many media timeouts or fake TV timeouts, timeouts when we don't even have TV, all those things have slowed down this game enough. You don't see any games played in 2 hours and 10 minutes anymore. And I think that the flow of the college hockey game is often lost, and it's changed. That has changed the game dramatically as well. And to further slow it down, I think is a major problem. You don't want 3-hour games. And we come close enough at the NCAA tournament time when you're having 3, 2, or 2.5 or 3 minute TV timeouts every period, and you've just added somewhere around 27 minutes to your game right away. And so we've got to find ways to still keep college hockey more watchable, keep flowing the game. But I agree, it's tough when you have a major injury. You want to see the right penalty called, and there's got to be a way to get it done.
Well, anyway, that was not the only controversy in that game. The other controversy was on a goal that was waved off on Friday night that apparently St. Paul St. Cloud had scored, and it was the call on the ice was no goal. The determination after video was that it was inconclusive to turn over. I'm not going to dispute what the referees saw. I may have seen it a little differently, but I may not have all the video angles they did. What I think is lacking there, both for fans and for coaches, although coaches do get some explanations, but not always from what I understand. But an explanation would be good. Just to say, hey, this is what we saw. This is why. Even if you don't have the referee wired up, if the referee gives an explanation that the public address announcer can say, no goal, puck crossing the line was found to be inconclusive. At least there's some explanation. But instead what you have is people looking at video that is made available and say, what's wrong with these guys? Can't you see that that's clearly over the line, instead of getting an explanation? Explanations help.
Explanations do help. That lack of standardization. I know that there was a game this year. I feel like it was an exhibition game in North Dakota that they wired up the referees, but that's technology that is a little expensive if you want to do it like the NHL. It's very effective, I think, in the NHL, where the referees get on the PA, have a wireless mic, and tell the fans exactly what they need to hear. It takes a lot more training and a lot more standardization. We talk about the fact all the time that you have 6 conferences with 6 heads of officials at the men's Division I level. If there was more of a standardization, if there was more instruction from one person, whether it be Frank Cole, who's the national director of officials for the NCAA, that I feel that too often he's underutilized because they really only bring him into play around NCAA tournament time. So, there's a lot that can improve. I still will defend referees to the hilt because of the fact that the game is so fast and there is a human element. You're going to make mistakes, and even replay can't make everything perfect because building to building, you have different television quality or camera quality. So I literally, my heart goes out to every official who has to do the job because it's so difficult. But it is, you do get into a position where sometimes those mistakes and errors and small issues creep up. And this was a weekend and one game on Friday night that we had 2 pretty controversial situations.
Well, and let me close this part of the discussion with this. This is an issue in every sport at every level. All you have to do is look at the NSC championship game a couple of weeks ago, something that, 60,000 people in a stadium and millions of people watching on TV saw didn't get called and admittedly should have been pass interference. Those things are going to happen. The solution is not to get all up in arms. The solution is to continue to improve, to continue to educate. And I know because I've talked to these guys, you've talked to these guys, we've talked to them quite a bit. There is a real intention, at least from the NCAA level in officiating and rules, to continue to teach and to improve, not only to improve the officiating, but to improve coaches and players understanding how to play within the rules. And so I know they're working on it. Nothing's perfect, and it's a work in progress.
It is, and that's the credit that should go, is that there is an ongoing attempt to improve. But there's also a finite number of great officials out there, and you can teach and improve and all that sort of stuff. But you need a lot of officials to get through Division I hockey. There's 60 teams. It's more than the NHL has. So you're talking about really training and trying to get continued improvement from a lot of different referees. And I give them all the credit for what they do, both the officials and those who supervise them. But there's always something more that can be done. We know that, and that's the quest to get to as close to perfection is what I think everybody strives for.
On a weekend night, you're talking 100 to 120 officials in action. That's quite a bit. Well, Jim, let's pause and we'll come back because there was a lot of other hockey going on over the weekend. But let's take a moment to hear a word from our friends at the NCAA Frozen Four. That's coming up April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot, saved by Morris. Takes the shot,
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Continuing with Weekend Review, I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Well, it was a big weekend involving the number 2 team in the country coming into the weekend, and that's UMass. A bigger weekend probably for Maine as they got the split with the Minutemen.
Yeah, and anybody that knows Maine and knows that that's a team that plays very well at home. It's one of the more difficult buildings to play in, even if the crowds aren't what they used to be, when that was a predominant Frozen Four team every single year, national championships and all that sort of stuff. But that's still a tough place to play. And, I think UMass recognizes now they're in a situation. If you remember the first half, we talked about how they got through November without ever having to play on back-to-back nights. And here's now they're in a situation where they're playing back-to-back nights almost every weekend. And this is a pretty tough contest to travel. It's a long bus ride from Amherst up to Orono. It's going to be, I'd guess, close to 6+ hours. And some people out in the Midwest might say that that's a short day trip. But, in terms of hockey, that's a long trip. And good for Maine. They jumped out to a 4-1 lead. UMass tried the furious rally in the third and came up short. For Maine, though, it was more than just a win over a great opponent, which is something they can hang their hat on. But it also gave them 2 more points in the standings, which gives a good amount of room. They now have a 5-point lead in the standings over 9th place Vermont, a 6-point lead over 10th place. I'm sorry, a 5-point lead over Merrimack, a 6-point lead over 10th place Vermont, and a 7-point lead over 11th place Connecticut. And that bubble between 8 and 9 is the difference between making the Hockey East tournament, not making the tournament. So Merrimack was probably rooting pretty hard for UMass so that they could have stayed as close to Maine as possible. But suddenly they find themselves, pretty far away from that bubble, making up 2.5 games in the last, I believe it's 4 weeks of a season. That's a lot to ask. So Merrimack's going to have to get their act together, and Vermont and Connecticut, they're even further behind. So all 3 of those teams really in peril of missing the tournament. And Maine, they put themselves on even more solid footing with that upset win.
Well, another big upset, if you want to call it that. I know it was called that in the media and even from the NCAA ice hockey folks. A weekend sweep at home, Western Michigan over Denver. Now, that is one of the most difficult places to go into and play for a visitor to play at Lawson Arena at Western Michigan. But a really convincing victory on Saturday. But Western Michigan, I think they'll probably find themselves in the top 10 in Monday's USCHO.com poll after that sweep of Denver.
Yeah, and this is a great bounce back because it was a 10-game unbeaten streak that went into St. Cloud for Western Michigan a week ago and got swept. So that ended a big streak. They lose 2 nights in a row, gave up for what they had been doing, they gave up a lot of goals, 3 on Friday and 5 on Saturday. But then they came back and they're playing Denver on home ice and they clamp right down. And that was really key. Only 1 goal allowed each night. The offense got going. They only scored 3 goals the previous weekend. They scored 8 this weekend. And suddenly everything back in Western Michigan land is better. And Andy Murray and his staff can know that his team just passed a pretty big test because you put those 2 opponents back to back and the way that they were playing coming in, St. Cloud and Denver, those were 2 really dangerous teams. And that's a statement weekend for Western Michigan to say, listen, maybe we're not going to win this regular season, but we're ready to contend here, and we're not going away. We're not going to shrink back, and so that's a really good weekend for them.
In the Big Ten, Penn State came back to get a win after losing to Michigan at Yost on Thursday. Madison Square Garden, a 5-2 win for the Nittany Lions. They have been struggling. They're in a 3-way tie for last place in a league that's really bunched up. But that is a win that could help turn them around a little bit.
Yeah, it is bunched up, and 3 points per win. You feel like any of those teams still technically could win it, but somebody has to get more consistency, because right now the only team with real consistency within league play has been Ohio State, and I know that Notre Dame will get a crack at trying to break them this weekend, and that becomes a pretty big series out in Columbus, where you get the top two teams in the league playing one another. Everybody else is probably sitting there hoping for a split, so that if there's a sweep somewhere down the standings, you can finally gain some ground. But Ohio State's been the consistent team, the most consistent team. Notre Dame probably the second most consistent team in this league. So this weekend when they play each other, everybody's going to have to keep their eyes on that series. That is a big one.
It was a big weekend for Providence, winning both halves of a home series with Northeastern. The Friars had come into the weekend with 3 straight losses in conference, punctuated in between by a win in the Mayor's Cup over Brown in a non-conference game. How big was this for Providence?
It's a confidence builder, and to know how they did it, and they did it with what I think is one of their strongest suits, and that's defense. They had 3 losses, 2 to Boston College and 1 to Boston University, gave up 4 goals in all 3 of those games, and they had only done that a couple of times. I think it was twice all year coming in. They had a 7-5 win against Merrimack in November, and then a 4-4 tie against Denver. They had really shut down everything on defense, and Hayden Hockey has been playing such strong goal for them. And he went back to it this weekend. That's a Northeastern team that we know can score goals. They have a high-flying offense. 1 goal on Friday, a shutout for Hockey on Saturday, and it's strange. Just when you think that there's some. What was the old line? Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. That's every Providence fan right now. Just when I thought I was out and was realizing maybe this wasn't the team that we thought it was, boom, they pull them right back in. And this is, I had seen them back in early January when they played Miami, and I thought, boy, this is a very good Providence team, maybe the best team in Hockey East. I'm starting to believe it right. Again, that's a good weekend sweep against a very good Northeastern team.
Well, speaking of shutouts, on Saturday, Joey DeCord got his 7th shutout of the season for Arizona State. This is the time of year you start looking at PairWise, but nobody's paying more attention to it probably than Arizona State. A loss on Friday, 4-2 at BU, dropped Arizona State that night to number 16 in the PairWise, which would have meant out of the tournament. The 3-0 shutout on Saturday puts them at number 12. It's going to be volatile, and it's not a cliche. It's true. It's really playoff time for Arizona State. And the next 2 weekends are going to be huge for the Sun Devils.
Yeah, what a crazy story to write here, and we've been talking about it all season. You're an independent team, but you really only have 6 games left to get anything you need to get done, because you're in position right now to likely get a spot in the NCAA tournament. Maybe if there's some upsets, then you become that bubble boy, but you're in really good position when you're at 12. You've got 4 games now, 2 at RIT this weekend, 2 against American International the weekend after. I've seen both of those teams a few times now, and everybody says, oh, well, you got to win your games against Atlantic. Boy, you must win your games against Atlantic if you're Arizona State. They're winnable games, but these are 2 of the best teams in the league. If you do hold serve, maybe you win 3 or 4, maybe you win all 4, then you're going to be playing almost like a playoff series against Minnesota at Minnesota to play yourself into the NCAA tournament. And that's where if they get a win, I think, on the road at Minnesota, combined with 3 or 4 against the Atlantic hockey teams, that's when I feel like I'll know that Arizona State is on solid ground. But you're talking, you got to win at least 4 of these next 6 games to have a hope. And, if you want to know just how close it is right now for Arizona State, their RPI adjusted RPI is 0.5503, and teams like Notre Dame and Northeastern are basically less than a hundredth of a point in back of them. And that's when you know just how close it is. And that's why it was so volatile this weekend. One loss dropped them way down because everybody was able to pass them. I think it was Northeastern, Notre Dame, and Harvard all passed them, or maybe it was Bowling Green. And then you get that win on Saturday night, a good road win against Boston University, and you bump yourself back up 4 spots. So I don't think that there's any bump to be taken in your RPI over the next couple of weekends, because right now we have RIT sitting 31st in RPI in the country and American International 37th. Minnesota probably gives you a little bit more bump. They're right around where Boston University was. Actually, those two teams almost have identical RPIs, but so that's where I think the hay can be made, but you can't lose these games. You lose to two teams that are 31 and 37 in RPI, and you're going to start dropping. So big couple of weeks here for the Sun Devils, and I'm excited. This is a story we've been trying to follow basically since late November, early December, and let's. I'm not rooting. I swear I'm not rooting, but there's a part of me that would just like to see an independent team get into this tournament for the first time in almost 25 years.
Let me ask you quickly about Joey Decourt. He's got great numbers, obviously. 930 save percentage is outstanding. 2.23 goals against, very good. But when you put that 2.23 goals against up against 7 shutouts, it kind of paints a picture of an Arizona State team that at times has given up a lot of goals and at other times has just shut down the opposition. What's the story there?
Well, I think that, as good of a team as we know this is, there's still a little bit of inexperience in big situations, and there can be nights where when things start to go wrong, they might not have that fight to get back in. Now I say that they've played a lot of, 1-goal games where they've been able to be down a goal and score late to earn a tie, or even I think they got a win on one of their games on the road when they were down a goal late. So Joey Decourt is a stud. This kid, probably this will be his last year in college hockey. He has a lot of NHL interest, and he, talking to his coach, there's a pretty confident feeling that he might not be able to stick around. He'll get a lot of pressure to sign at the NHL level, and for a good reason. He's a great goaltender. He's probably at this point you have to look at his numbers and wonder if maybe he's a Hobey Baker candidate. I don't think he's going to win the award or even get into the hat trick, but you got to look at everything he's been able to do, and he's been a big part of this team's run. And he's probably worthy of both Hobey Baker and All-America accolades at this point.
Well, let's quickly, as we wrap things up here, take a quick look around standings, especially to mention leagues where we didn't spend a lot of time today. Let's just go through the 6 quickly. Atlantic hockey, a big bunch up. You've got 7 points separating the top 6 teams in the league, and just 6 points separating the top 4. Everybody's trying to play top 4 or top 5 to get that first round bye. This is going to go down to the wire.
Yeah, I was very impressed on Saturday night seeing American International, and they have that lead over Air Force. I think that they're a good enough team, and talking to Eric Lang, they seem really focused in terms of knowing what's ahead of them, and really not getting too caught up in the standings. They, as he said, I know there are teams close to me, but I can't even tell you which team is exactly where right now, because we're just trying to focus on moving ahead. The big weekend for them will be a couple of weeks when they play Arizona State. That'll be some games in hand that teams below them might have. They'll have that bye week at that point. But I think that's a great race. I think, you got to look at Air Force and RIT probably right in the mix. Maybe Mercyhurst. I think they might have played themselves out with their loss on Saturday night if they win their 2 points out of first, but losing now being 6 points out, it's a bit of a number to make up at this point. But that's a really good race. And then obviously we've talked about it before, the other positions, whether you're going to have that first round bye, whether you're going to be a home ice team in the second round, because 4 or 5 that we've mentioned, 5 goes on the road, even if they get the bye. So there's a lot of races to worry about there, and it's going to be anybody's game for a lot of those races the rest of the way.
In the Big Ten, Ohio State has the best winning percentage, but just a 4-point lead in a 3-point league. However, Ohio State has games in hand, 1 or 2 against other teams in the league.
Yeah, so this weekend becomes huge. If they were to be able to sweep Notre Dame this weekend at home, I think then that could be the cushion that they need. But there's still a lot of hockey to be played where they keep playing right up until their tournament weekend. So the March 2nd will basically be the last day for most of those teams. I think I'm right when I say that. I don't think they play into the weekend of the 9th. No, they do not. So you have basically 8 games left in that league. So if you can get a good enough lead this weekend, Ohio State, you're going to be in really good shape. So that's one to keep an eye on. We'll talk about that more during Game of the Week later this week.
ECAC also bunched up at the top with only 2 points separating the teams in the top half of the league, but still some unbalanced schedules there. Some teams with 1 or 2 games in hand.
Yeah, I know for at least Harvard, the Beanpot will affect them. They'll play a couple of single game weekends here, so they've played more than others. Some teams have to catch up. But when you look down the standings and see 17-17, 16-16, 15-15, that's first through sixth place, the number of points each team has. You're Dartmouth, and you might not feel like you've had the greatest season at 8-10-2 overall. You're only 2 points out of first place in your league. That's a little crazy. So that's going to be a league with a lot of pennant chases going on here. It should be some interesting weeks ahead.
As we turn in the standings now to Hockey East, again, kind of bunched up. Everybody within one weekend from the top 5. It's same story there, right?
Yeah, for the most part it is. And I think that, we mentioned that Maine UMass game, and that, a lot of the teams, we mentioned Merrimack might not have been cheering for Maine, but everybody ahead of Maine was cheering for Maine because it kept everybody within an earshot of UMass for that conference title. I mean, UMass Lowell is in 5th place right now. I've actually tied for 4th, but they've got some games in hand on teams, and they're only 4 points out of first place. So that one, we've seen it in the last few years, has often changed a lot down the stretch in terms of, a 5th place team can jump up and end up winning the title, So anybody, I think, from 1st to 5th should have hope to win that championship. And even Providence sitting there in 6th, 5 points out. They played well last weekend. If they go on a run here, they could be a team that's hoping for a title on the last day. And
Merrimack, Vermont, and Connecticut, things are getting really urgent for them for that last playoff position.
Yeah, if you're one of those teams, you have to make sure you're taking 2, if not more, points every weekend, or your season's going to end on the 2nd of March.
St. Cloud State has a 5-point lead over Minnesota Duluth in the NCHC. The split with North Dakota kept the Huskies from really running away with that. They've got Miami coming in this weekend, but this is still a horse race.
It is, and I would like to say that Western's in it after that sweep this weekend, and that there's only 7 points back, so I do believe they are still kind of in that, and they have one extra weekend of play compared to most of the other leagues because their conference tournament starts a week later. So there's a good shot that Western Michigan get back into it. I don't see anybody underneath them. I think North Dakota and Denver have put themselves too far behind the 8 ball in league play. Both of those teams can start focusing on the NCAA tournament and, more importantly, getting home ice in that NCHC quarterfinal round.
Finally, the WCHA, Minnesota State has opened up a nice lead one that they could protect over a weekend, even if they get swept.
Yeah, and that's really a 2-horse race between them and Bowling Green. So now it really is, kind of finding ways to take points out. They finished their season series against one another. So I think this should be Minnesota State. I mean, they've been the most consistent team all season. They're the first team in the country to 21 overall wins. And they're, really solid at home this year. So they've got I think it's 4 of their last 8 are at home. I would look for them to probably be the team to be able to wrap that thing up. But you never know. I guess that's why you keep playing the games.
Well, that's going to wrap things up for this week's edition of USCHO Weekend Review. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.